You already know what time it is. It's R3's time, where we read. Don't forget, a knowledge of self and understanding. We use our real eyes to read. Currently, we are reading African Glory, the story of vanished Negro civilizations by J.C. deGraft Johnson. This is an excellent and fascinating book of a fascinating period in world history on the rise of great civilizations in Africa, the continent, and the people. So we are going to be actually reading about today the religious propaganda for imperial expansion, which was a policy to conquer Africa. You can find that on page 73, but I think it's a great title to start off with. So we're going to be speaking about the religious propaganda. I'm going to pass it over to our hostess with the mostest. She's going to let you know a little bit of the details, how to find us, and a little bit more, and you'll see me again.
Oh, I didn't know you were going to be ready for me that quick. But I want everybody to catch me outside because that's where I'm going currently. Why? Oh.
You're on camera for Instagram.
It's Howard, so the hostess with the mostest. I'm here to talk to you, to introduce you to our book club, which you should be well aware of, so you caught me outside. We are R3, and we have a weekly book club every Tuesdays at 3. You can catch us at R3 Realize, which will get you to TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and to the website where you can like, share, and follow for free on all of those platforms. But if you're so inclined, you can also donate on the website. We have many campaigns, we have fundraisers, and we also donate to the community. But you can also donate, and you say, hey, I want to donate to a book and sponsor a book. We'll take that too. If you want to donate $1, we'll take that too. That's every Tuesday at 3. This week we're on chapter 7 and 8, where we're reading about the invasions from Saudi Arabia, the Arabs and different other regions into Europe, for the Africans, and into Africa. What I found interesting was I did not know that the Rock of Gibraltar was originally conquered and named after an African king. I guess they call it king because he was Ibn. I can't remember his name right. Tariq. I think Tariq. Ibn. Can't remember his name. And then the Spaniards, when they claimed it back, renamed it Gibraltar. I've actually stood on that rock. So, and you can see North Africa, and it's not too far off. I took a boat over there. So I thought that was interesting. What also I found interesting is that throughout history, these worlds and these lands have been conquered with a sword in one hand and the Bible in another, and also a collection plate behind you. So they have a sword and they're coming down and striking down forces. They got the Bible or the Quran, and they are trying to indoctrinate you into their religion and tell you what you're wrong. And then they got the collection plate because you need to pay taxes. It's all about money and power and greed. And I found this one passage. I'm trying to read it. It's kind of messed up on my phone. It's Omar the Second, 1700. I think it's on the...
Uh-oh, you're frozen. You there? Uh-oh. Let's see if we can get her back. She's going to be quoting, I know exactly where she is actually referencing Omar. See if I can find her. Are you there? Okay, so while we wait briefly, I do see Alon. I already responded to you, and it canceled it. What is happening? This is mine. Okay, guys, hold on. I guess something happening with our connection. Okay, hold on. My computer lost connection. I need to tell her it's not her phone. Why would I lose Wi-Fi? Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm like, maybe if I open my door, all the internet is acting out, right? I'm like, it literally just shut off the internet on the computer. I'm not understanding what just happened. Okay, so she was going to reference Omar, and he is referenced in one of these chapters, but really quick, I did get your Cash App that you're saying. I will write it down before I close the live so I have your name. But ours is still the same. I believe it's R3 Real Eyes that you sent last time. But DM it to me, Alon, and I'll make sure that we request it if you want to send.
Progress.
I think she's back. Are you there? Are you there?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. You stopped on Omar, and then my computer lost service. I don't know.
Oh my God. Okay, I'll say it again from what I was reading that I found it interesting. It's going to change now because I was so good the first time.
That's okay.
That, these are hot. All of these lands were conquered with a sword in one hand and the Bible or the Quran in the other, and somebody behind them collecting cash, taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and all these wars were fought in the name of some religion. And to this day, also, and this I'm adding this, I found it quite strange that the lands that we're referring to that had all these fights are still the same lands. He mentioned Sudan, he mentioned America, he mentioned upper right Egypt, which is technically over there in Palestine area, going over there. He mentioned a lot of different areas that are still at war today. And all of these areas were invaded by the Arabs or later by European white men from the Europe, now America, who are still pulling the puppet strings. And somehow the lands of Europe and America are really kind of untouched by a lot of these wars that's ongoing that they're the puppeteers for. But back to Omar II, who was then the caliph, replied in the words regarding taxes, God sent Muhammad to call men to a knowledge of the truth and not to be a collector of taxes. And I find R3 Real Lives where we seek the knowledge of self through activism and education. So I kind of tied that to that and then say that we're supposed to be, if it's good and mighty, you're supposed to be trying to convert people because truth to power, not trying to convert them to collect taxes. But that's it. We're at R3 Real Lives, and we are here every Tuesday at 3. And
every Tuesday at 3, R3 Real Eyes. I think she's getting into the car, so it might have disconnected. But there you go. Go ahead, finish.
You didn't hear nothing I said?
I did. Just finish the end. R3 Real Eyes. Where can they find us?
R3 Real Life at TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and a website. But we'll get back to that later. So I'm back to you, kids. We're going to finish this review.
Okay, and that's perfect connection that you made. I, too, also actually highlighted the passage about Omar II, so I'll just drop in on that since she mentioned it first. It's on page 71, the last paragraph, and it's reference to Omar II, who was a caliph from 717 to 720, and it says here, who was then the caliph, replied piously. So it was a conversation that was being had in between the Coptic Christians and the Arabs, and this is the conversation that was had, and his reply was that God sent Muhammad to call men to knowledge of truth and not to be a collector of taxes. So when we're speaking about this chapter is called the Arab Conquest of Africa, and we'll also be talking about the rise of African empires. But what was happening is, we've already talked about last week about Christianity taking over Africa. So the first country in Africa, or the first empires in Africa to be colonized, was actually those of North Africa, which a lot of people don't speak about a lot. We always reference South Africa or reference Egypt, but you have to understand that the white people came in through the north. They came in through the north through Spain, and this is where you always get the conversation of the Moors helping with Spain, or they call them Blackamoors, and that is just to put significance, that is just to put a connotation, on the fact that a lot of the Spanish people in the army were black, they're African, so they called them Blackamoors. So these are where these terms came from, because these are one of the first empires to be colonized, which was in North Africa. So if you think about that, between the colonized and the conquered and the conquerors were coming in through North Africa to come and conquer the North African tribes, which we spoke about Queen Kahina, which was one of the last queens, one of the last royals to defend Africa, to try to keep Africa for Africans. I also want to throw in there something you can look up yourself, but if you ever talk about California and heard of Queen Khalifa, her story is very similar to that of Queen Kahina. And it's very funny to me that Queen Kahina was dominant of North Africa, Algeria, mainly that area. Remember, these countries now are borders that were created by the conquerors. They weren't necessarily borders that the Africans had themselves. They weren't also all called Africans. This is a term overall for the continent, but they were coming from micronations. So Queen Kahina, which was referenced last week, is actually one of the last defense of Africa to keep them out. And she was pushing back towards Spain to keep them out, and Rome and everyone else. So if you look into the story of Queen Khalifa, it's very similar into where she was coming from, and being an Amazonian woman, and then also being one that they called a warrior. Queen Kahina of North Africa was very similar. So I just found that very, very closely linked. And they say that Queen Khalifa, whose name was supposedly after California, was a fable. It was something that was created out of Montalov's book and his fantasy of California. But during this time, and him being in Spain at the time, I think he would have gotten a lot of reference from the real Queen Kahina, if anything. So just put that into your mind. But yes, we are talking about religious propaganda being used. And so in these chapters, we're just going to kind of read briefly, but like she coined, their Mohammedanism was starting to spread after Christianity. It's starting to spread through North Africa, and we see the rise of the Arab populations at this time. And a lot of it was forcing people to come out of Christianity by way of tax. It also mentions the colors that you wear. A lot of the Coptic Christians, Orthodox Christians, I should say, had to wear black as to be able to identify themselves. Then they went to yellow, then it went to blue. So all of these are to distinguish who was against you in order to cause war or cause strife against them, to give more taxes to them. And a lot of the people who were converting over to the opposite of Christianity were not taxed. So this was a big reason why a lot of people denounced their own religion, their own spirituality, their own faith in order not to be taxed, since it was a hard time. You can find that reference on page 72. It's the first paragraph, last sentence, and it referenced that. I'll just read the chapter. The paragraph. The practical administrative issues involved, however, made it impossible for Omar's second pious standards to be maintained, and new converts were required to pay taxes. In 744, a century after the Arab conquest of Egypt, we find a governor of Egypt again exempting new converts from taxations, and it is recorded that 24,000 Christians renounced Christianity in order to escape paying taxes. So all of this was about religious propaganda for imperial expansion, and this was the policy for the continent of Africa. I do want to go over a little bit, since I referenced already Queen Kahina. We're kind of jumping around. We are speaking about chapters 7 and 8, if you're there, and starting on page 68. So Queen Kahina, some of the, just read some of my quotes. On the first page 68, it says here in the beginning of this paragraph, the Arab conquest of North Africa was no walkover, except perhaps in Egypt, where the Arabs were received as deliverers from cruel rule of the Byzantium. The resistance put up by Kusela of Mauritania and by his relative Kahina reflected the African mood of the period. In fact, so fierce and determined were the African counterattacks that the Arab governor once remarked that the conquest of Africa was impossible, and that it scarcely had a Berber tribe been exterminated when another came to take its place. However, after Kahina's defeat and death in 705, the African resistance eventually weakened. So again, this very strong warrior woman, Queen Kahina, who is not referenced a lot in our history books at all, actually coming out of the mouths of men that I actually find, she was the last defense for the continent of Africa, to keep it for Africans, so much so that one of the Arab governors thought that Africa's conquest was impossible. So if you just think about that statement, before they actually conquered Africa into what it is now today, what if a woman was still in power? What if they all surrounded and came up with Queen Kahina? Africa probably would not have been colonized to this day. So if I just think of it in that term. So if we're going to jump down on that page 68, the last paragraph, it mentions Tariq, and how so our hostess with the mostest mom already referenced to Tariq. And so he is the reason why we have the name the Gibraltar Strait, the Gibraltar, which is the island that is in between North Africa and Spain, right? So he conquered this island in between North Africa and Spain to hold his defense, and they end up taking the name and naming it Gibraltar, but it comes after his name. But we'll read about it on page 68, the last paragraph. He's introduced. So the African Tariq, now governor of Martinia, entered into a friendly relation with Count Julian, governor of Ceuta. It was then that Tariq discovered that Julian was on a very bad terms with his master Roderick, the Gothic king of Spain. Roderick, a profligate prince, had ravished Julian's daughter, and Julian was looking for a way to avenge the dishonor done to his family. So Count Julian urged the African Tariq to invade Spain, but the suggestion had been to carry out cautiously. Tariq accordingly informed Musa ibn Nusar, who had appointed him governor, that he intended crossing the straits to survey and examine the possibilities for an invasion. So due to Tariq being able to go into this strait, this is where they took the name and named it after him. It used to be called the Hill of Tariq, the Gibraltar Strait, but now they changed it. Of course, Spanish, the conquerors always changed the name, and they gave it the name Gibraltar. So you're going to find that on page 69, the last paragraph. It says, Tariq left a garrison at the foot of Mons Kaup, which the Africans renamed in compliment to their general. They renamed it Jebel Tariq, which means the Hill of Tariq, a name which was subsequently corrupted by the Spaniards into Gibraltar. So General Tariq and his African army surprised and captured several Spanish towns. Among them were Heraclea, which was only 4 miles from the Rock of Gibraltar. King Roderick soon heard about the invading army, and he set out about gathering a huge force to oppose Tariq. After a series of skirmish, the two armies met near Xerxes and Andalusia, and the conflict was a bloody one, but Tariq was victorious and soon became master of Spain. So I just read the note that my grandfather actually highlighted. Remember, we're reading his library books. So it says that the conquest of Spain was an African conquest. They were Mohammedans, Africans, not Arabs, who laid low the Gothic kingdom of Spain. So these were Mohammedan Africans. And at the time, again, as we referenced, Mohammedan, he came in to teach truth to power and power to truth. But these people wanted to corrupt that and change people over to Arabs, right? And so that brings us into one of the first African converts to the Mohammedan faith was Bilal. He's a enslaved person. Muhammad himself referred to Bilal as the first fruits of Abyssinia. And this African slave is still famous throughout the Muslim world as the first Muhaddin. Now it's called a muezzin. And this is the officer who chants the call to prayer. So if you ever are near or around a mosque and you hear them doing a call to prayer, and I like to call it singing, it's very beautiful sound though. But this is all attributed back to the first slave, which his name is Bilal. Okay, so that's a very, very good a note to make, or a mental note to make, and it's spelled Bilal, just in case I'm saying it wrong. Then we're going to jump down midway through that paragraph. Kusela, which is the victor after Queen Kahina, it says Kusela then had the Iluk to be taken prisoners by the Arabs, and he quickly submitted to Islam again in order to escape death. So again, a lot of people converting into Christianity, away from Christianity, into Islam, away from Islam, was doing this to escape death, to escape poverty, to escape being taxed. A lot of it was out of fear or out of survival merely only. And it always brings to me the quote by Desmond Tutu that says, when the white man came to Africa, we had the land and they had the Bible. When the white man left, we had the Bible and they had the land. So it just shows you how it was all about conquering over land. It was all about power. It was all about obtaining our resources. It was never about God. So I like to just put that statement out there. And so also on page 70, it speaks again about Kusela, who again is a relative and a successor of Queen Kahina. So it's the third to last paragraph on page 70. It says Kusela's relative and successor, Queen Kahina, was one of Jewish persuasion and not a Christian. She never gave up her faith, but strangely enough, she advised her 2 sons to do so and to embrace the Islamic religion, which they did. And again, like I said, a mother always wants their children to succeed them and to survive, right? So if you think about it in that sense, she knew she was killed for not converting over to Islam. So she knew that if this was going to happen to me, I'll take it. But for my kids, they must continue on. So she told them to make sure they convert over in order to sustain themselves, to survive. This is something that African people, us as a people across the diaspora, have to do time and time again. Even to this day, if you think about how religious some people are in Christianity of the African diaspora here in America, but also around the world, we're very religious, and we turn our backs on anybody who is not as religious, and that is out of a mean of survival. You think you're not going to be accepted. You think you're turning away from God. It's all convincing you to not like yourself, but to accept someone else's faith, all on fear. It's based on fear. A word in Sankofa, an Adinkra word also. It's a Dinkra symbol, but it's Sankofa. It's called Jainami. Jainami means fear no one except God. So one should be able to think for themselves. One should be able to know the truth for themselves. One should be able to learn for themselves and not have any fear that someone else is going to do something to them. So we have to keep that in mind as Africans also around the diaspora. She looked as us do here today and now. And yeah, Queen Kahina, if you actually Google her, she was known as dark skinned with lots of hair. I love her I love that. So, okay, so she never gave up her faith is what I wanted to put. And this is how Queen Kahina died. She was pushed back into the mountains and she never gave up her faith, but her children had to eventually accept it. So another factor, this is on page 70, last paragraph. Another factor which served to spread Mohammedanism was the system of intermarriage practiced by the Arabs. A lot of times now when we're talking about intermarriage or interracial marriage, right, we always want to give the acceptance. Oh, it's okay and love is love. But at the time where the foundation and history of interracial marriages or intermarriage, it started all over the conquest and conquering of another group of people. So the Arabs seen this as okay. If you didn't turn over to Christianity, they would just marry someone that was one of the women or so that were Christian and make them be a believer of their faith, or have children by them that would have to be a believer of faith. So this intermarriage was practiced a lot by the Arabs, and it was to take over. It was that propaganda to take over, the religious propaganda to convince you to drop your identity and take theirs. Okay.
Oh, and that's what I wanted to say also. I forgot to mention that I saw the religious and the political forums always together. Those factions walked hand in hand as they do today.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
Because people will be quick to say, United States, we're a Christian country. Why?
We lost you.
Oh, that was ending with why.
Oh, okay. Yeah, exactly. You're 100% right. And that is the issue. And again, the topic I put for one of the quotes for this live is religious propaganda for imperial expansion was the policy for the continent of Africa. Whether you're a Christian, whether you're an Arab, whether whatever, this is what they were trying to do. It wasn't about God. It wasn't about spreading God around. It wasn't because God spoke to anybody. It was simply for religious propaganda, just as it is today. Because why can't you accept someone else's religion or faith if it's not your own? Because you want them to pay you, that you want to profit off of them. You don't want to convince them of the truth, right? Because the truth should be given to you. It also is a reference in one of these chapters how education was at a decline at the time, and this is why a lot of people were converting over to other people's religion, because of the lack of education that was allowed at that time. So this is a big deal, and this is why the R3, the Real Book Club, we read to you, we bring you different truths. I'm not trying to convince you, because if that's the case, I have 3,000 people on here. I'm just simply showing you the truth and bringing the truth to power, and you can do whatever you will want with it, right? So then on page 72, the last paragraph, it just talks about the remnants of the Coptic Church. And since we just left Ethiopia and seeing how big Orthodox Christians are there, I even got fussed at for having on eyeshadow and lipstick going into one of the churches, as if God was going to, as if God told you individually to tell me something. If I don't believe in what you believe in, but I show you respect, that should be all that is said, right? But again, it's about overthrowing someone else's identity and this religious propaganda that they want and they still have for the imperial expansion, right? So it mentions this, the Coptic Church, page 72, last paragraph, first two sentences. It says, the remnants of the Coptic Church in Egypt have survived to this day, and there is no doubt about it having decreased in size over the centuries. Self-preservations have been given as one of the reasons which prompted some of the early Christians to desert their church. The pressure of taxations has already been mentioned as another, which we already mentioned it. And romance may also on occasion provide a motive. No Christian might marry a Muslim woman, and it is unlikely that love quite often triumphs over faith. Then lastly, the intermittent persecution of Christians served to drive some of them into the arms of their persecutors. So if you even think about that, when war comes and you have all of these Christians being charged, they're going to be going to the people who say, I'm here to help you, but I'm a Muslim. So it was driving them into the arms of the people who were persecuting them as well, right? Or how we always say with different politics, we're choosing, which is good, but we're choosing the lesser of two evils, right? You have to pick a side, and this is kind of where, and I'm saying good in political terms now in the debate, but I'm just at that time, this is what was happening, and picking the lesser two evils. So instead of the person trying to physically kill you, you run to the person who's going to spiritually persecute you, if that makes sense. And I like the way I put that. So then again, I'm going to read on page 73, the quote I just keep stating. We're going to read from C.P. Groves. This is what he writes about it. He's a professor. So on page 73, I'll kind of read the second paragraph down to that sentence. It says, according to Leclerc, non-Catholic Christians, Jews, and pagans were all made subject to certain disabilities. No doubt that Justinian's intentions was to make the population feel that it would be better off in the church than outside of it. Professor C.P. Groves, commenting on this phase of the history of the church in Africa, says this: religious propaganda for imperial expansion was the policy. The policy was so far successful as to bring within the pale of the church a number of Berber peoples not hitherto untouched, to bring them in, that is to say, as far as the ruler's nominal assent was given. Such conversions presumably not based on a catechetical instruction and undertaken from political motives were just as permanent as the political interests of those concerns. Given a new situation in which these political and maternal interests change, the robe of office of the North African chief could easily doffed as it has been donned, together with the religion of imperial court which is symbolized. The century of more Byzantine rule in North Africa shines with fresh converts to the Christian faith, yet most of the conversions were superficial. With the Arab invader came a challenge to all easy loyalties and an uncovering of the situation as it really was. The African church, once the home of the Tertullian, of Cyprian, and Augustine, came to an end because the only peoples it had ever really won were swept away. The thin top layer of romanticized Africans was ripped off with the advent of Islam, and with it the hope of Christianity in North Africa. So again, if you see how these two religions, although they're different, they did the same thing. Okay, so the last paragraph on page 74 just make a reference to again the Moors. I kind of already mentioned it, so these are my quotes from my summary. But it says, it was because the conquering army in Spain was largely made up of Africans from Morocco that we hear such phrases as the Moorish invasion of Spain, and why Shakespeare hero Othello is a Moor, and why the word blackamoor exists in the English language, a word which leaves no doubt as to the color of the army of occupation in Spain and Portugal. And this was also, in this chapter, was talking about how Spain did itself an injustice by basically outing all of the Moors who actually helped them have all of the knowledge that they had. And so, did I highlight that part? No, I'm going to read that actually. And then we'll jump. Yeah, we're good. We'll jump into the next chapter. So it says, to begin with, there was an intolerant self-sufficiency among the Arabs. And this is on page 75, second paragraph. To begin with, there was an intolerant self-sufficiency among the Arabs, which made the Quran the only source of learning and the only book worth reading. This made the development of science and true knowledge impossible, but the intolerance was soon to give way to a new wave of learning. The organization of education throughout the Muslim world began in the 8th century, and by the 9th, learned men in the schools of the Cordoba in Spain were corresponding with learned men in the Cairo, Baghdad, Bukhara, and the Samarkand. The Greek classics were rediscovered and Aristotle came into his own. The museum at Alexander, so long neglected, became the center of research and learning. Mathematics, medicine, and the physical sciences received fresh attention. The clumsy Roman numerals were soon ousted by the Arabic figures which we use to this day, and the zero sign first came into general usage. Arabic words like algebra and chemistry became universal words. In astronomy, Arabic names such as Algol, Boots, and Aldebaran were to be commonly accepted. Today, we still talk of the alchemists of the Arab experimental chemists who discovered many metallurgical and technical devices, and whose work on alloys, dyes, distilling, tinctures, essences, and optical glasses literally revolutionized the world. The term Arabic we intend in cultural rather than a racial sense, for the Arabs did not believe in the Heron folk theory and freely intermarried with those they conquered. They freely intermarried with those that they conquered. From the Chinese, the Arabs learned how to manufacture paper, and they in turn transmitted the knowledge to Europe and the rest of the world. From the Indians, the Arabs learned new mathematical forms and new philosophies, which also imparted to Europe and the rest of the world. Arab alchemists sought in vain for the philosopher's stone, which was to have power of changing metallic elements one into another, and which was intended to enable them to make artificial gold. So if you see the influence that we've had on the entire world to take that knowledge and to spread it around, it was all African. So we're going to jump. We have 10 minutes left on the meeting. Let's keep it going. Actually, 8 minutes left. So I'm going to just read from chapter 8 just briefly some of the quotes. Let's see what we need to know. So this chapter is the rise of African empires. It's going to mention a lot of the Ghana. It's going to mention Mali empires in this chapter. And a big thing to know about the Ghana empire is a lot of the Ghanaian empire was they were pushed out. So we're just kind of going to read just some of my highlights. On page 78, last paragraph, it says, but perhaps the two most interesting writers on the Ghanaian Empire and the other African empires are Ibn Battuta, an African from North Africa tribe of Luata, who was born at Tangiers in 1304, and Ibn Khaldun, an Arab who was born in Spain in 1332, but who later came to live in Africa. So it speaks about these two. On page 79, last paragraph, it says, after a short stay at home, he visited Spain, and this is talking about Ibn Battuta. It was after his return to Spain that he decided to visit Sudan, Central and West Africa. Ibn Battuta did not see the Ghanaian Empire, but he did see the Mali Empire, which had taken its place. What he has to tell us about West Africa of very great importance because it represents the views of a learned and experienced traveler, the views of one who has seen Arabia, Syria, Spain, Ceylon, Palestine, Turkey, Tibet, India, China, and many other lands, who had lived and taught in those lands. I'm just making that a point because someone who is a scholar that I know actually told me that it's not enough to travel to a country and simply take pictures or to visit it, that you have to do extensive research. But traveling and being an experienced traveler is extensive research because you have a knowledge of self and understanding with your real eyes. So just remember that the more you go around the world, the more you see, the more you can compare, the more you know. And then we're going to jump over to page 80, just a good reference. The Ghana kingdom appears to have been founded about 300 AD. So keep that in mind. I also highlighted on this page Wangaras. It's a lady whose book I read. I can't remember the name of it. I think it's The Colonization of Africa by Iri Wangara. I'm going to get her name and I'll tag it under here. But this is, I believe this is where her name came from. So I highlighted that. On page 81, second paragraph, is good to note that the city of Ghana, or Kuumbi, which is as the inhabitants call the capital of their empire, consisted of two townships, each situated on a hill spreading down a valley into a vast plain. The two townships were 6 miles apart. One was a Muslim town or a modern equivalent, the Zongo, and the other was a pagan town. The pagan town was generally known to the Muslims as El Gaba, the wood, because it was surrounded by thickets which were held sacred to spiritual affairs of the state, which further housed the royal tombs. Priests lived among the thickets, and it is recorded that El Gaba contained a prison from which it was believed that no prisoner ever returned. It must have been a prison for those sentenced to death. So it was surrounded by thickets and wood. And another mention in this chapter is how there's not many horses in that area either. And most people in those areas, if you ask them, they haven't really seen it because of I'll get to that. I don't know if I'm going to get to that chapter. We have 5 minutes left. There's these flies that attack these horses. So I thought that was interesting being in that isolated area. On page 83, that paragraph following, that first paragraph, the last sentence, it says the Almoravid forces under Abu Bakr captured and sacked the city, and this brought about the dismemberment of Ghana Empire. Abu Bakr was a colleague or a friend, you want to call it, of Muhammad, right? So he was one of the first caliphs after Muhammad to spread around Islam. So put that into reference. On page 83, I'm going to mention the Ashantis, which has run in my blood. So the third paragraph, it says the Ashantis settled in the middle of the Gold Coast. They were being pushed out, right? So they settled in the middle of the Gold Coast. The Akims and the Aquapims settled in the southeastern regions of the country, and the Fantis in the middle coastal region. There is reason to believe that the Fantis would have split up into 3 units or more if they had not reached the coast in time. So that's reference to a lot of the people who inhabited this area, the Empire of Ghana, not necessarily just a country. It was an Empire of Ghana. They were pushed further inland, and this is where you get your other tribes, right? Or I like to call us micronations. So another one is on page 83, last paragraph. It says Makasim, however, was not the first Akan town to be founded in the Gold Coast. The first town was called Techiman in Ashanti or Brong. It was the first town, and it was built by the combined efforts of the Akan group of tribes. Anyone who had visited Techiman and seen the flatness of the countryside noted that it is last stop from north just before one enters the forest belt, and they can appreciate why the ancestors of the Akan settled there for a time being before entering the forest with its unknown dangers and mysteries. So I have 3 minutes and 33 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and end it there with the last sentence on 84. I always make reference that Africa used to be a monarchy. It was ruled as far as women are the ones who pass down royalty, but I just like this reference that kind of pushes towards that on page 84, second to last paragraph, second sentence. It says, or first sentence, all accounts show that the customs in Ghana approximate to the Akan customs of today. Mother right prevailed in the city, and people were succeeded by their sisters' children. Thought that was interesting, but I'm just going to wrap that up there, and we'll leave it. There's a lot more to discover in the rise of African empires, but that's just a brief introduction. You guys should be reading chapters 9, 10, and 11. We're going to do 3 chapters for next week. Make sure you get it in. I'm going to pass it over to our hostess with the mostest. She's going to let you know where to find us. So just to wrap it up, we have 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Back to you.
2 minutes and 40 seconds, so should I speak talk here? I'm not E40 though. Right now, this is also the hostess with the mostest, and we are reading African Glory with the R3 book club, R3 Realized Book Club. Every Tuesday at 3, you will see me. You might not see her because our camera don't be working all the time, but you definitely will see me. Well, sometimes. But anyway, we meet every Tuesday at 3. We're reading African Glory. Next week, chapters 9 through 11 we'll be going over. If you have any comments or questions, send us an email, and you can get that email by going to R3 Realize, where that will take you to Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and to the website where you can like, share, follow for free. Remember, it's every Tuesday at 3. We are here, and you can like, share, follow for free. And that's a reminder. It's share, follow for free, and you can like us too. And at R3 Realize every Tuesday at 3, what you will get to me and to her. Back to you, kids.
Perfect. All right, so we're going to wrap up there. Again, we're reading The African Glory by J.C. deGraft Johnson. It's a story of vanished Negro civilizations, but they're not vanished here. We will remember them and use a knowledge of self. And just to wrap up on chapter 8, the last sentence on page 91, it says, this gives us a good idea of the degree of social compromise between the conquered and their conquerors. We had social compromise. In order to survive, one must do what they got to do, right? So we are R3, we're eyes, we're lives, we're lives, where we promote knowledge of self through education and activism. You can find us every Tuesday at 3 o'clock p.m. The time might change, but the date never will. So make sure you catch us reading African Glory by J.C. deGraft Johnson. It is very important that a people have knowledge of self in order to prevail. Period, point blank. We will see you next week. Peace. Or we say 3. Oh, let me get her 3. Do your 3.
3? Uh-oh.
Okay. Yeah, don't crash. All right. See ya. Share, like, and follow. Bye, Alon.
Like, follow.